Hello artists and welcome back to another art tutorial with Mr. White. Today we're talking about setting up and creating the grid on your photograph and on your drawing paper. Now at this point you should have already watched a video that helped you to decide on a photograph, print it out, and figure out the size of your final drawing. If you haven't, take a moment, pause this, go check that out, and then come back. Now, it's important that we know that ahead of time because it informs the size of the grid we're going to make. I'm using a 1-inch square grid on my photograph, and I'm going to enlarge it for my final artwork. When you're using a ruler, it's important that you know where the zero is. On my ruler, the zero, or the spot that measurement starts from, is at the edge of the ruler, the very short end. However, some rulers are different, so you need to double check that. Similarly, check to make sure you know what a whole inch looks like. On this ruler, that is the longest line, and it comes after the first digit of any number. To start this process, you're going to zero the ruler, or place that zero on the edge of the photograph. You don't want to include the margin or the white space around the picture, so you want to zero right on the photo. And I notice that I use the left-hand side for a measurement or for a reference point on both the top and bottom. You want to be consistent in the side that you're measuring from. So once you measure every inch along the top and the bottom, then it's time to connect those dots. When you're making a grid, it is much easier to have a straight, accurate, consistent grid if you measure for each line twice, the top and bottom, or the left and right side. When you're drawing those lines, it's a lot easier to do and quicker by far if you follow this process that you see me using here. Spreading my fingers out and holding in two different spots along in the sort of middle or at the thirds of the distance of the ruler, using my pencil as a pivot point and pressing it firmly on the one of the marks that I measured, sliding the ruler gently against it, and then using that pivot point and pivoting the ruler, which I know is locked onto the right spot on one mark, pivoting the other end of the ruler toward my second mark. If I don't feel my hand move, then I know that my ruler was in the right spot on one end, and once I see it on the right spot at the other end, I'm good to draw my line. For our photographs, we want to draw those lines very firmly. Now, we're going to repeat that same process, measuring out every inch of the height of the photograph. And again, we're going to pick a side to start from, and we're going to stay consistent. If your photograph is an exact inches on both sides, it doesn't make much of a difference. But if your photograph is not, if your photograph has a little bit over or under an inch on either dimension, you'll really need to keep track of and use the same reference side. This makes sure that you don't have the extra bit line up on the opposite sides, making a bunch of crooked lines and making you have to start over. So make sure to take the time to measure on all four sides. Don't be afraid to go in and fix mistakes. I had one of my lines that was a little bit crooked. I found that I hadn't measured it quite perfectly, or maybe it was just slightly off. Now, here I am writing down the size of the photograph that I'm using. And then I'm going to convert that or enlarge it. Remember, in order to enlarge the drawing from the photo, we need to use a consistent factor. So I'm going to multiply mine by 1.5 times and make my drawing 1.5 times bigger. I will also have to use a 1.5 times the size grid box. Now I multiply my 8-inch wide by 10-inch tall photo by 1.5, and I get 12 inches by 15 inches. My paper that I'm drawing on is 12 inches wide already, so that's all set, but it's 18 inches tall. So I need to go in and I make 2 marks that are 15 inches down from the top. I could choose to center it if I wanted to, but I think I'm going to cut off the extra since it's only on one side, and so I just measured it all and kept it on the bottom. You can put it all on the top wherever you prefer, as long as it's consistent. Once I made my 2 marks that were 3 inches from the bottom and 15 inches from the top, I made a straight line across, and that gives me the window or box that I'm going to use for my actual drawing. Now for this exercise, again, my drawing is going to be 1.5 times larger than the photo, so I'm using 1.5 inch grid boxes. For those of you who are doing the same, remember 1.5 intervals or 1.5 inch intervals is 1.5 inches, 3 inches, 4.5 inches, 6, 7.5, 9, 10.5, 12, and 13.5. A common mistake that I see students make is to start at 1.5 inches and then just add another inch each time, which does not work out well. So take the time to measure and make sure that you're using the same reference side. I chose to use the left-hand side for mine. And use that same process, holding your fingers spread wide, your ruler pivoting against your pencil, and drawing the lines all the way across the window of the picture. However, notice on the drawing, we want to use very light lines. We are not pressing firmly. In the end, we will probably want to erase most of the grid on the photograph for the optimal art aesthetic outcome. If our grid line is really heavy, it's very hard to erase and doesn't look very good. And then we just go and do the same thing, measuring. In this case, I measured down from the top and mark every 1.5 inches. And I do the same thing once on the right-hand side of the page, once on the left-hand side. Pencil on the mark, ruler against the pencil, pivot to the top mark, draw the line. And that's really all this process takes. Just some time and care in your attention with the drawing.